The Chicago skyline glowed against the dusk as Ethan Parker maneuvered his sedan through the evening traffic, his mind already halfway home. At 32, he'd carved out a solid reputation at Warner Capital, a top-tier investment firm where precision and discipline defined his days. Numbers danced in his head, projections, margins, client portfolios, but they faded the moment he thought of Sarah. His wife of 5 years was his anchor, the one who turned their modest Lincoln Park apartment into a haven. Ethan lived by routine. Leave the office at 6 p.m., grab a coffee from the corner shop if he was early, and be home by 6:45 to share dinner with Sarah. Tonight, though, a folded envelope in his briefcase promised to disrupt that rhythm. Sarah was in their kitchen when Ethan walked in, her laptop open to a graphic design project she'd been tweaking for a local nonprofit. Her dark hair was loosely tied back, and she hummed softly to a playlist streaming from her phone. "Tough day?" she asked, glancing up with a smile that always seemed to reset his world. Ethan set his briefcase down and pulled out the envelope. "Not tough, just different. Warner's throwing a gala. Big deal to celebrate the quarter's numbers. He wants us both there." Sarah's eyes lit up. "A night out? I'm in. I could use a break from deadlines." She closed her laptop, already mentally planning. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. He wasn't one for glitzy events. Small gatherings with friends were more his speed, but this was personal, a direct request from his CEO, Richard Warner. Declining wasn't an option. The gala was set for Saturday at Warner's estate in Lake Forest, a sprawling property that screamed old money and influence. Ethan and Sarah arrived just as the sun dipped below the horizon, the driveway lined with sleek cars and valets in crisp uniforms. Sarah squeezed Ethan's hand as they stepped inside, her presence grounding him amid the crowd of suits and champagne flutes. Ethan introduced her to colleagues, his pride evident in his quick smiles. "This is Sarah, my better half," he'd say, and she'd laugh, deflecting the compliment with a quip about his knack for spreadsheets. Her warmth drew people in. Analysts, partners, even the office's grumpiest accountant cracked a smile. Ethan caught himself watching her, grateful for the life they'd built. 5 years of marriage, countless late-night talks, and a shared belief that loyalty and respect were non-negotiable. They were the couple others envied, not for wealth or flash, but for something deeper. As Ethan got pulled into a conversation with a senior VP about market trends, Sarah excused herself to grab a drink from the bar. The room buzzed with chatter, a mix of finance jargon and polite small talk. She ordered a sparkling water, her eyes scanning the crowd for familiar faces. That's when she noticed him, a young guy, early 20s, leaning against the bar with a glass of orange juice in hand. He was dressed sharply, his posture relaxed, but his gaze sharp, like he was sizing up the room. Their eyes met briefly, and Sarah offered a polite nod before turning back to the bartender. But the weight of his stare lingered, persistent, like a spotlight she couldn't step out of. The young man pushed off the bar and sauntered over, his stride too confident for his age. "Didn't expect to see someone like you in a place like this," he said, his voice smooth but edged with something that made Sarah's skin prickle. She turned, keeping her expression neutral. "I'm here with my husband," she said, her tone firm but polite. "Ethan Parker, one of your dad's analysts." The guy, Jake Warner, Richard's son, grinned, unfazed. "Lucky guy, Ethan. I'm Jake. And you're?" "Sarah," she said, stepping back slightly. "Nice to meet you, but I should get back." Jake's grin widened, like he'd heard a challenge. "No rush. You light up this room, Sarah. Bet you hear that a lot." His words were casual, but his eyes locked onto hers, too intense, too deliberate. Sarah forced a tight smile, muttered a thanks, and walked away, her drink untouched. She rejoined Ethan, slipping her arm through his, but the unease stuck with her, a quiet alarm she couldn't quite shake. Back home, Sarah tried to brush it off. Jake was just a kid, probably used to getting attention with his last name and slick charm. She didn't mention it to Ethan. He'd had a good night, his colleagues praising his latest project, and she didn't want to sour the mood. But the next morning, as she sipped coffee and scrolled through Instagram, a notification popped up. A friend request from Jake_Warner03. She frowned, clicked the profile, and saw his face, same cocky grin from the gala. Attached was a message. "Couldn't stop thinking about you last night. Let's grab a coffee sometime." Her stomach twisted. She blocked the account without responding, hoping that would be the end of it. It wasn't. By noon, another notification appeared, this time from a different account, JW_Chi22. The message was bolder. Ignoring me won't make me go away, Sarah. You're too special for that. Her fingers hovered over the block button again, but something stopped her. This wasn't just a flirtatious kid anymore. There was a persistence, a presumption that felt wrong. She screenshot the message, her hands steady despite the racing pulse in her throat. Sarah glanced at the clock. Ethan wouldn't be home for hours. She could tell him tonight, but what would she say? That the boss's son was being creepy? That she felt watched, even in her own home? She pushed the thought down, focusing on her work, but the screenshot sat in her gallery like a ticking bomb. That evening, Ethan came home with takeout from their favorite Thai place, his usual routine to kick off the weekend. Sarah greeted him with a smile, but her eyes flickered to her phone on the counter. She wanted to tell him to spill everything, but the words caught in her throat. Ethan sensed something, his brow furrowing as he set the bags down. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft but searching. Sarah nodded, forcing a laugh. "Just tired. Long day." She'd tell him tomorrow, she decided. Or maybe the day after. For now, she'd keep the peace, not realizing that her silence was already letting Jake Warner think he could push further. Sarah woke to the buzz of her phone on the nightstand, the screen glowing with a new notification. Another message from a fresh Instagram account, ChicagoJake22. "You look good at the gala, Sarah. Bet you'd look even better over coffee with me." Her stomach churned. She'd blocked Jake Warner twice already, but he kept coming back, each message bolder than the last. She screenshot it, adding it to the growing folder in her gallery, her fingers trembling slightly. Ethan was already in the shower, his morning routine as predictable as ever. Sarah wanted to tell him, but the thought of dragging him into this mess, his boss's son, no less, made her hesitate. She deleted the message, blocked the account, and got up to make coffee, hoping distance would make Jake lose interest. By midweek, Sarah's hope faded. Wednesday morning, she headed to a cozy coffee shop in Wicker Park to meet a client about a logo design. The meeting went smoothly, her sketches earning enthusiastic nods, but as she packed up her notebook, she felt that familiar prickle on the back of her neck. Across the shop, Jake sat at a corner table, scrolling through his phone, a half-empty latte in front of him. Their eyes met, and he flashed that same smug grin from the gala. Sarah's heart sank. This wasn't a coincidence. She grabbed her bag, nodded a quick goodbye to her client, and headed for the door. Jake stood, casually blocking her path. "Fancy seeing you here," he said, his tone light, but his eyes locked on hers. "What's the rush, Sarah? Got a minute to chat." She kept her voice steady. "I'm Bussy, Jake. Please move." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. One coffee, that's all I'm asking." Sarah's grip tightened on her bag. "I'm married. I've said no. Respect that." She pushed past him, her shoulder brushing his as she hurried out. On the street, she glanced back. Jake was still watching, unfazed, like a hunter biding his time. She walked faster, her pulse racing, and pulled out her phone to record a quick voice memo. "Jake Warner, coffee shop, 10:17 a.m., approach me again." She didn't know why she needed proof, but instinct told her to keep it. That evening, Sarah sat at her desk, trying to focus on a design deadline, but her mind kept replaying Jake's words. Her phone pinged again, a new message from yet another account. "You can't keep running, Sarah. I know where you work, where you live. Let's make this easy." The words hit like a punch. He knew where she lived. She checked the locks on the apartment door, her hands shaking as she double-checked the deadbolt. Ethan was still at the office, likely buried in spreadsheets. She wanted to call him, to spill everything, but the threat to his job loomed large. Jake's father, Richard Warner, controlled Ethan's career. One wrong move, and Ethan could lose everything he'd worked for. Sarah decided to take control. She started documenting everything, screenshots, timestamps, even a photo of Jake at the coffee shop she'd snapped discreetly. She saved them in a locked folder on her phone, her evidence growing like a shield. But the fear was relentless. Thursday morning, she skipped her usual run in Lincoln Park, worried Jake might show up again. Instead, she worked from home, her laptop open to a design project she barely touched. Another message arrived. "You're playing hard to get." "I like that." She blocked it, but the cycle was exhausting. Jake wasn't stopping, and his confidence, backed by his father's wealth and influence, made him feel untouchable. Friday brought a new escalation. Sarah went to the grocery store, a routine errand she'd always enjoyed. As she reached for a carton of milk, a voice behind her said, "Sarah, didn't peg you for a skim milk type." She froze. Jake stood at the end of the aisle, holding a basket with a single apple, his casual stance a stark contrast to the menace in his tone. "You live around here, right? Nice neighborhood." Her mouth went dry. She set the milk down, her voice firm despite the knot in her chest. "This stops now, Jake. I'm not interested, and I'm not afraid to report you." He chuckled, stepping closer. "Report me? To who?" "My dad." "Good luck with that." He leaned in, his voice a whisper. "You'll be mine, Sarah, sooner or later." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the aisle, the milk carton sweating in her hand. Sarah drove home, her mind racing. She parked, checked her surroundings, and hurried inside. Locking the door, she pulled out her phone and recorded another memo. "Grocery store, 3:45 p.m. Jake Warner threatened me." Her evidence was piling up, but so was her fear. She couldn't keep this from Ethan any longer. It was bigger than her pride, bigger than his job. When Ethan came home that night, carrying takeout from their favorite taco joint, he noticed her silence immediately. "Sarah, what's wrong?" he asked, setting the bags down. She looked at him, her resolve hardening. "We need to talk. It's about Jake Warner." Sarah showed him the screenshots, played the voice memos, and recounted every encounter. The gala, the coffee shop, the grocery store. Ethan listened, his jaw tightening with each word. When she finished, he took her hand, his voice steady but laced with anger. "You don't have to face this alone. I'm handling this." Sarah nodded, relief mixing with dread. Ethan pulled out his own phone, opened his work email, and started typing a meeting request to Richard Warner. "First thing Monday," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "This ends." Sarah squeezed his hand, grateful but uneasy. Jake's threats echoed her mind, but Ethan's resolve gave her something she hadn't felt in days: hope. Monday morning broke with a gray Chicago sky, the kind that promised rain but held back just to keep everyone on edge. Ethan Parker was up before dawn, his usual routine replaced by a single focus: confronting Jake Warner's harassment of Sarah. He'd spent the weekend reviewing her evidence, screenshots of Instagram messages, voice memos from the coffee shop and grocery store, a blurry photo of Jake smirking in the dairy aisle. Each piece fueled Ethan's resolve, a quiet fury building behind his calm exterior. Sarah, still shaken but steadier with Ethan by her side, insisted on coming with him to Warner Capital's downtown office. "I need to be there," she said, her voice firm. "This is my fight, too." Ethan didn't argue. He knew her strength, even if she doubted it herself. They arrived at the firm's sleek headquarters just before 8 a.m., the city's morning hum barely audible through the glass doors. Ethan had scheduled a meeting with Richard Warner, the CEO, citing urgent personal matters. The receptionist ushered them into a conference room, where Richard was already waiting, his posture relaxed but curious. "Ethan, good to see you," he said, then nodded to Sarah. "Mrs. Parker, a pleasure." His tone was warm, the practiced charm of a man used to steering conversations. Ethan didn't waste time. He pulled out his phone, opened the folder of evidence, and slid it across the table. "This isn't about work," he said. "It's about your son, Jake." Richard's brow furrowed as he scrolled through the messages. His expression shifted from confusion to discomfort as he read Jake's words. "You can't keep running, Sarah. I know where you live." He listened to the voice memo from the grocery store, Jake's voice low and threatening. "You'll be mine, Sarah, sooner or later." Sarah watched Richard's face, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She spoke up, her voice steady despite the knot in her chest. "He's been following me. The gala, a coffee shop, the grocery store. It's not random. It's deliberate." Richard set the phone down, his jaw tight. "This is unacceptable," he said, his voice low. "I need to hear this from Jake." Ethan leaned forward. "With all due respect, Richard, this isn't a misunderstanding. Your son's actions are harassment, plain and simple. Sarah's been living in fear, and I won't stand for it." Richard nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the phone. "I'll handle this." Immediately, he picked up his desk phone and dialed. "Jake, get to the office. Now." His tone left no room for argument. Sarah glanced at Ethan, her relief tempered by the uncertainty of what came next. They waited in silence, the clock on the wall ticking louder than it should. Jake arrived 20 minutes later, striding into the room with the same cocky air Sarah had come to dread. He glanced at her, then Ethan, his smirk faltering when he saw his father's expression. "What's this about?" Jake asked, leaning back in his chair as if he owned the room. Richard didn't hesitate. He pushed the phone toward his son, the screen still open to the messages. "Explain this," he said, his voice like steel. Jake's eyes flicked to the screen, then back to his father. "It's just a joke, Dad. She's blowing it out of proportion." Sarah's voice cut through his dismissal. "You followed me. You threatened me. That's not a joke." Jake shrugged, his gaze sliding to her. "You're reading it wrong. I was just being friendly." Ethan's hand clenched into a fist under the table, but he kept his voice level. "Friendly doesn't involve showing up at her grocery store or sending messages about knowing where we live. You crossed the line, Jake." Richard held up a hand, silencing the room. He turned to his son, his face a mix of anger and shame. "You think this is a game? You're harassing a man's wife, my employee's wife. This stops now." Jake opened his mouth to protest, but Richard cut him off. "No excuses. You're coming with me. We're dealing with this today." Richard stood, motioning for Jake to follow. He paused, turning to Ethan and Sarah. "I'm sorry you've gone through this. I'll make it right." He led Jake out, the younger man's bravado crumbling as he trailed behind. Sarah exhaled, her shoulders relaxing for the first time in days. Ethan took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, but her eyes were distant. "I just want this to be over," she said. Ethan squeezed her hand. "It will be." Back at home, Sarah tried to settle into her routine, but the confrontation lingered in her mind. She opened her laptop, hoping work would distract her, but her phone buzzed with a new message. Another account. "You think telling my dad changes anything? You're still on my mind, Sarah." Her heart sank. She blocked it, but the violation felt fresh, like Jake was still reaching into her life. She called Ethan, who was still at the office. "He messaged again," she said, her voice tight. Ethan's response was immediate. "Send it to me. I'm going back to Richard." Sarah forwarded the screenshot, her fingers shaking. She locked the apartment door, checked it twice, and sat down, her phone clutched tightly. Jake wasn't done, and the fear she tried to bury clawed its way back. The Chicago wind whipped through the streets as Sarah forwarded the latest message from Jake Warner to Ethan, her hands steady despite the dread knotting her stomach. The screenshot showed a new Instagram account, JW_Chi25, with Jake's taunting words. "You think telling my dad changes anything? You're still on my mind, Sarah." She blocked it, but the violation stung, a reminder that Jake's persistence knew no bounds. Ethan, still at Warner Capital's downtown office, called her back within minutes. "I'm going to Richard now," he said, his voice calm but edged with resolve. "Stay safe, Sarah. I've got this." She nodded to herself, locking the apartment door and double-checking the deadbolt. The routine felt like armor, but it couldn't fully shield her from the fear that Jake might escalate further. Ethan marched straight to Richard Warner's office, his phone gripped tightly, the screenshot burning a hole in his focus. Richard was on a call, but when he saw Ethan's expression, he ended it abruptly. "What's happened?" he asked, his tone sharp with concern. Ethan slid the phone across the desk, the new message open. Jake said it again. This came an hour after our meeting. Richard's face darkened as he read the words, his jaw tightening. He leaned back, exhaling heavily. "I thought I made it clear this morning," he said, more to himself than Ethan. "This ends today." He picked up his phone and dialed Jake, his voice cold. "Get here. Now. No excuses." Ethan stood firm, his arms crossed. "I trust you'll handle this, Richard, but Sarah's safety comes first. If this doesn't stop, I'm taking it to the police." Jake arrived within the hour, his usual swagger noticeably dimmed. He avoided Ethan's gaze, slumping into a chair across from his father. Richard didn't waste time. "You sent another message," he said, holding up Ethan's phone. "After I told you to stop. Explain yourself." Jake shifted, his voice low. "It was nothing, Dad. Just a message. She's overreacting." Richard slammed his hand on the desk, the sound cutting through the room. "You're harassing her. You're threatening her. This isn't a game, Jake. You're 22, not a kid anymore." Jake's eyes darted to Ethan, then back to his father, searching for an out. "It's not what you think," he muttered. Richard didn't flinch. "It's exactly what I think. And it's over." Richard turned to Ethan. "I'm taking immediate action. Jake's leaving Chicago tonight." He faced his son, his voice unwavering. You're enrolling in a leadership program in Colorado. It's structured, disciplined, and far from here. No phones, no social media, no contact with Sarah or anyone else unless I allow it. Pack your bags. Jake's face twisted, a mix of defiance and disbelief. You're sending me away? For this. Richard stood, towering over him. For crossing a line you had no right to cross. You've embarrassed yourself and this family. Get out of my sight and be ready to leave by 6 p.m. Jake hesitated, then stood, shooting a glare at Ethan before storming out. Ethan returned home that evening, finding Sarah at her desk, her laptop closed for once. She looked up, her eyes searching his. What happened? She asked. Ethan sat beside her, recounting the meeting, Richard's decisiveness, Jake's banishment to Colorado. Sarah exhaled, relief washing over her, but her guard stayed up. Will he really stop? She asked. Ethan nodded. Richard's serious. Jake's gone, and I'll make sure it stays that way. He paused, then added, I'm installing a security system tomorrow. Cameras, new locks, the works. You're safe, Sarah. She leaned into him, her tension easing slightly. Thank you, she whispered. The next day, Sarah met with a therapist recommended by a friend, a step toward processing the fear that had shadowed her for weeks. She spoke about the gala, the coffee shop, the grocery store, each encounter a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. The therapist listened, guiding her to reclaim her sense of control. Meanwhile, Ethan coordinated with a security company, installing cameras at their apartment's entrance and a smart lock system. He also turned down a promotion Richard offered, a gesture of respect for his stand. I don't need a title, Ethan told Sarah later. I need you to feel safe. His choice grounded her, a reminder of the man she'd married. Steady, principled, unwavering. By week's end, Richard called Ethan with an update. Jake was in Colorado, enrolled in a rigorous program designed to instill accountability. He's cut off from his trust fund until he completes it, Richard said. I'm sorry it came to this, Ethan. You and Sarah deserve better. Ethan thanked him, sensing the weight of Richard's shame. Back home, Sarah started sketching again, her creativity flickering back to life. She joined a local art group, finding solace in community, but she still checked her phone less often, wary of new notifications. Jake's absence was a start, but trust in her own safety would take time to rebuild. Sarah stood at the edge of Lincoln Park, the Chicago skyline sharp against a crisp autumn morning. It had been 3 weeks since Jake Warner was sent to a disciplinary program in Colorado, and the weight of his threats no longer pressed on her every step. She'd started running again, her sneakers hitting the path with a rhythm that felt like reclaiming her freedom. Her phone, once a source of dread, now carried music instead of menacing notifications. Yet, she still glanced over her shoulder, a habit born from weeks of vigilance. Ethan jogged beside her, his presence steady as always. They didn't talk about Jake anymore, but the unspoken bond of facing that ordeal together had deepened their connection. Back home, Sarah poured coffee while Ethan checked the new security systems app, confirming the cameras were active. The locks and motion sensors gave her a sense of control, but it was Ethan's actions, his unwavering stand against Jake, that truly anchored her. She'd been attending therapy twice a week, unpacking the fear that had seeped into her daily routines. The sessions helped her name the violation, to see it not as her fault but as Jake's abuse of power. She started sketching again, her designs bolder, infused with a defiance she hadn't known she possessed. Her latest project, a mural for a community center, was set to be unveiled soon, a public step toward reclaiming her voice. At Warner Capital, Ethan navigated his days with a new clarity. He'd turned down Richard Warner's offer of a promotion, prioritizing Sarah's peace over career ambition, but his stand had earned him quiet respect among colleagues. Whispers of his confrontation with Richard and Jake circulated, painting him as a man who valued principle over opportunity. Richard, true to his word, ensured Jake remained in Colorado, cut off from his trust fund and social media. A follow-up call confirmed Jake was struggling with the program's strict regimen. No phones, no shortcuts, just accountability. Richard's voice carried a mix of resolve and regret. He's learning the hard way, he told Ethan. I should have set boundaries sooner. Sarah's confidence grew, but caution lingered. She avoided posting her location online and stuck to group outings with friends. One afternoon, while meeting her art group at a Wicker Park cafe, She noticed a young man lingering nearby, his posture too familiar. Her heart raced, but it wasn't Jake, just a stranger waiting for a friend. She exhaled, shaking off the moment, but it reminded her how deeply Jake's actions had marked her. She texted Ethan, not out of fear, but to ground herself. "All good, just a scare," she wrote. He replied instantly, "You're stronger than you know. Home soon." His words, simple and certain, were a lifeline. That evening, Sarah and Ethan hosted a small dinner with close friends, a rare gathering since the ordeal began. Laughter filled their apartment as they shared tacos and stories, the warmth of connection easing Sarah's lingering tension. After the guests left, she and Ethan sat on the couch, a quiet moment stretching between them. "I'm proud of you," Ethan said, his hand resting on hers. "You faced this head-on." Sarah smiled, her eyes meeting his. "I couldn't have done it without you. You didn't just protect me. You believed me." Ethan shook his head. "That's not even a question. We're a team." The mural unveiling came a week later, a sunny Saturday that drew a small crowd to the community center. Sarah's design, a vibrant swirl of colors symbolizing resilience, earned applause and hugs from neighbors. Ethan stood nearby, his smile wide as he watched her shine. For the first time in months, Sarah felt unburdened, her creativity no longer overshadowed by fear. She still carried her phone with its locked folder of evidence, a reminder of her strength in documenting Jake's harassment, but no longer defined her days. Richard Warner sent a formal letter to Sarah, delivered through Ethan. It was an apology, handwritten, acknowledging Jake's actions and his own failure to curb his son's entitlement sooner. "You and Ethan have my respect," he wrote. "I'm ensuring Jake faces consequences and learns from this." Sarah read it twice, then set it aside. It wasn't closure, she'd build that herself, but it was validation. She and Ethan discussed it briefly, agreeing to let the matter rest unless Jake resurfaced. For now, the distance and Richard's oversight were enough. Sarah and Ethan settled into a new rhythm, their marriage stronger for the scars it bore. They took evening walks, planned a weekend trip to Lake Michigan, and laughed more freely. Sarah rejoined her running group, her strides confident, her eyes no longer scanning for threats. Ethan adjusted his work hours, carving out time to be home earlier, their dinners a ritual of reconnection. The ordeal with Jake had tested them, but it also revealed their resilience, a partnership rooted in trust, not appearances. The story's lesson lingered. True strength lies in standing up, speaking out, and protecting what matters, even when the cost feels high. Sarah and Ethan didn't just survive Jake's harassment. They emerged with a clearer sense of who they were, together and apart. Their quiet evenings, filled with shared glances and unspoken understanding, were proof that no threat could break what they built. For Sarah, every step forward, every sketch, every run was a victory. For Ethan, it was knowing he'd chosen his wife's dignity over everything else. And for both, it was the certainty that they'd face any storm as a team, unbreakable.